You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Find all of our shows at WeareLibertarians.com, like the flagship We Are Libertarians podcast. Whoops. You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Find all of our shows at WeareLibertarians.com. Welcome to We Are Libertarians. This is another episode of The Swamp Explained with Rob Quartel and myself. I'm Chris Spangle. And our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking to your friends, and that includes talking about the government as it exists now. And there is no bigger topic in the libertarian world than what a big swampy mess Washington, D.C. is. And so what we do here is talk through the swamp and how it works and how it operates. And I am joined by Rob Quartel, and he's worked for Republican presidential campaigns, government agencies like the EPA. He's been confirmed by the Senate to the U.S. Federal Maritime Commission. He's been a candidate for Congress and Senate, and he's also spent years working in private technology in that sector, working with startup companies. So Rob always gives us great insight into how things work there in Washington, D.C. Looking back, Rob, it must be rough for all the swamp monsters now that the official swamp ender has lost the election, or has he?
It's a good question. I think
take?
The swamp may have swallowed him.
Is this over or not? What do you think?
I actually think that in some ways he's a victim of the swamp. His particular personality, his MO, his lack of knowledge about it, which should be a lesson. His indifference to the process that's been developed. Of course, all of that says he's not a conservative, which we've talked about now for several years here.
Right.
But in the end, I think he was beaten not just by his own personality, but partly by the amplification of its flaws by the press, the establishment, bureaucrats, his supposed friends in D.C., and I think it's a mistake for him. It was a mistake, and
to run for president.
I've said it before. I think he could have actually accomplished more, and left less of a sort of a nasty trail in his wake. But that's not the path he chose, and it's not the path he typically has chosen throughout his life. So, you want to find a victim of the swamp? He's a victim of the swamp.
I think this is an interesting question, especially for libertarians who are outsiders who do look at, there's a lot of populism in the libertarian movement, which is defined as anti-elitism. Let's say Joe Jorgensen had won the presidency and walks into the Oval Office on January 21st or January 20th. They're going to face a lot of the same challenges that Trump faced. And he was antagonistic to the press, to the elites, to financial industry, to pretty much everybody. And that's sort of the hallmark of his entire life. If you watch Trump, an American something or other on Netflix, I mean, his whole career has been antagonizing people like Michael Bloomberg. And then Michael Bloomberg goes, well, I've always hated that guy, so let me drop hundreds of millions of dollars to defeat him. Is that the single greatest weakness of Donald Trump, is that he wasn't willing to cooperate or learn or change? He just said, by force and will, I'm going to impose myself because of the power of my position on everyone else. And was that in hindsight his biggest mistake?
Yes, in some ways. I cannot help but flash back to the image of him the day he visited Obama 2 days after the election 4 years ago. And Obama congratulated him the next morning after the election, and then Trump arrived the following day at the White House. And you must remember the president on the one side and Trump on the other, with this look on his face like, oh my God, just like, I have to deal with this. And what have I wrought? Actually, it reminded me at the time of my granddaughter, who well, my daughter actually, not my granddaughter, a long time ago, when she was the firstborn, and then we decided to have a second child, and we found out it was a boy, and we had a live-in nanny who stayed with us 30 years. We used to joke she would start by changing our children's diapers and end by changing mine. But but in any case, she really got into it, and she started asking my daughter, then 2.5, wouldn't you like to have a baby brother? Wouldn't you like to have a baby brother? You'd love to have a baby brother, wouldn't you? And then when she got her to think that was the right thing, she said, why don't you ask mommy and daddy for a baby brother? And so she comes to us and says, can I have a baby brother? And of course, I had to, well, okay, let's do that. and we, some months later, my wife goes to the hospital. My then 3-year-old daughter puts on the fanciest dress she has. And we take her to the hospital to greet her mother and her new baby brother. And I have a picture of her still in her dress on the bed, holding her baby brother, and with this look of horror on her face. I asked for this.
Right.
And I tell you, the day he arrived at the Obama White House, he looked like that.
Yeah.
And many
you saw it you saw it on Inauguration Day. I mean, I'll never.
It wasn't even Inauguration Day. This was 2 days after the election.
I'll never forget watching it, and you see the Obamas are thrilled. They have the biggest smiles on their faces. They're so happy. It's like, right, and then it pans over to Trump and Melania, and Trump and Melania are just like dour and grumpy. I mean, yeah. I don't think he ever really wanted to be president.
The finale to my story about my daughter and her baby brother is about a month later, she came to us and said, can you take him back? Trump, unfortunately, for all of us, you couldn't give it back.
That's sort of how I felt watching this campaign, is that he wasn't really trying. It wasn't 2016 Trump who was trying and was funny and likable and was making. He wasn't the angry, dour, awful Trump of the last 4 months. There's almost like anything he knew that he was trying to lose almost.
Yeah. Well, people in the White House have said that they think he was trying to lose. And there was speculation early on, because he didn't seem to be enjoying it very much, that he would be, he'd just be a one-termer. Well, he was a one-termer, but that wasn't the plan. So, and of course, now it's all about 2024 and all the rest of this BS. And, we know he's not going to be, I honestly don't believe the other candidates in the party, the Rubios and the Ted Cruzes and the others, who actually had to get away with it if he survives that long.
Yeah.
But he really, I think he mucked it up. And there are numerous things that you and I and others would agree are accomplishments, but they are so flawed in the way they were sold and the failure of support and all that. Of course, there are many things that no matter what he did, the press would have jumped on him. And I agree with him on that. He has every right to feel beaten up by the press, but you have to feed them. They're like sharks. And and of course, now the transition's actually going to happen without him. And you and I might want to speculate what it's going to be like, on January 20th. Is he going to be there or not?
Well, let's jump back, because
I have done a transition, so we may want to talk about that.
And I definitely do, but I want to kind of keep on this vein, because I think if you're listening and you're a hardcore libertarian and anarchist, dare I say, that still listens.
Well, they're
to
not the same thing,
but
right?
Let's say you were elected president. How do you deal with the swamp if you can't be antagonistic and that sinks you, then how would you handle it? Let's say you get elected president, because this is one of my arguments, is the populist message, the antagonism towards these folks isn't necessarily helpful, because wouldn't it be better to have a dialogue and open conversation with them? I mean, how would you handle the swamp?
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. So on both sides. So, and I don't know how much people know about the history of the transition, but there used to be a gap. The Electoral College met in December, and then the president was sworn in back in up in March, and then I think it was in probably the 20th Amendment, the Constitution, 1933, moved the beginning and the end from March to January 20, and that closed up the period. And then sometime in the 60s, they passed the Presidential Transition Act, and it gives you resources, So Trump is going to need he is going to want, in any case, the cooperation of the bureaucrats in the swamp when he builds his library, which he's going to want to build, and he can even pay for it with his own money, but he's still going to have to deal with the swamp in terms of his papers. Presidents used to own their papers from their administration. Of course, now there are so many. They generate as much in a day as all of George Washington's 8 years. And his were lost, in a fire, a lot of those papers and several others.
I'm talking about as president. Like if you were elected president, I mean, how do you not?
Oh, you need it. You want it.
How do you not make the same mistake? But also, if you get elected on this populist message of I'm against the swamp and against the elites, like, are you?
The big mistake there, and he did go in. He had a great transition. The Obama people, notwithstanding what he said, the other day about how it was terrible, horrible transition. The reality is he turned around at his inaugural speech and thanked Obama for a fabulous transition. Now, transitions between opposing camps are always a little awkward anyway. They said that some of the Clinton people, left computer messages and stuff for George W. Bush.
Stole the keys.
Some of the W. Bush people did for Obama, and probably some of the Obama people did for Trump. But by and large, these are very cooperative efforts. And if you're incoming, and if you were he got everything he needed. What he did not have, first of all, he didn't expect to win. So everybody has a transition planning effort. When I was in the president, in the Bush campaign, the people, there was a whole separate group of people planning about the what if he wins, what are some of the key things we want to be ready on day 1 and day 2 and day 3 and day 4. And under the Transition Act, there's a commission set up that spends between every administration, pulling all the papers together and the organizational structure of the government and all the briefing books, just sort of outside of all this process, and they convene the two camps that if you win, this is what's going to happen for you. And then, you have the official process of GSA, which we can talk about too. But the reality is he had a good transition. What he failed was to transition from being a candidate to being a president effectively. And you and I have talked about this numerous times, that the first thing a president has to do is take over the government. And the way you take over the government is you send in your army of political appointees. Now, he did send in a lot of people in the transition, and he sent people in to monitor the people he sent in. I had friends all during that period talking about that, and who were sent into the agency to be the sort of the policy guy, the lead, and then they'd send in some young hack to report on him or her.
There was some guy that was like literally carried his bags and was super loyal to him, and then he got appointed to head of the office that does all the personal affairs, basically
all the personnel.
All the personnel. Well, and this guy basically just appointed a bunch of
probably less. It's probably less shocking than you might think, but
I'm sure it happens.
But George Bush appointed Chase Untermeyer, and he was. Chase was a longstanding friend and colleague and an adult, and he knew everyone who George Bush knew, and he knew everyone he wanted to bring into the process. And so the transition's a complex process, but you really want to take everybody over, and then within some short period of time, you want to be running the place. And one of Trump's problems was he, in my opinion, he could never establish policy in any of the agencies early on because he just didn't get people in it long enough. And then he did things like he did with, the Defense Department and others. He as the 3 or 4 years moved on, he kept firing people, and that may be fun on a TV show, but it's not great for loyalty or consistency or constancy or execution of any kind of program. So,
yeah, because when you're exercising political power, I mean, part of exercising political power is that long-lasting influence in the government for generations. I mean, there are people retiring now that were appointed by Clinton that had a long career, and now all those positions he didn't fill are going to be filled by Biden's team, and he missed an opportunity to really influence the government in a free market direction. But that's probably because
of course, he will say, his supporters is, "Oh, well, he appointed all these judges,"
right?
And in fact, he did indeed appoint a lot of judges, and that's one where Mitch McConnell basically skunked Obama unfairly, in my opinion. But he held up judge processes and everything else. So, but Trump filled every single slot in the judiciary that he could possibly fill.
Yeah, but that's the thing about Trump is that, he appointed a lot of judges, but everything that was effective was done by Congress, Mitch McConnell, the swamp monsters, and everything that he managed completely fell apart.
And these judges, he has no idea who any of them are.
Right.
And of course, they're all going to be very conservative, very Republican. Oh, by the way, largely swamp. Right. Right. So they're, I would hazard a guess that probably 90% coming out of the society are going to be very traditional in their judicial mindset. But he wanted that. He didn't want kind of so-called activists and all the rest. So if you're Mitch McConnell, you pat yourself on the back because you got Trump to appoint all these judges that followed your own path. And since Trump has no path and had no ideology or any of that stuff, he didn't put a personal imprint, but he did put an administration imprint on the judiciary. So, and that will be long lasting. And the judges, he's appointed will be there another 30 years.
What would you say were like the top three things from a candidate perspective that he did that really sealed his fate? Is it just the fact that he didn't manage the bureaucracy in the way that like a Clinton, Clinton managed it through all of his crises and ended with a great approval rating, probably would have won a third term despite being impeached, and it's because he was able to kind of manage the message and the bureaucracy.
I would say that I'm not sure that anything he did as president led to his losing. I'll be honest. I think it's all personality driven and polling in on his side. He kept saying his gut was he was going to do better in these places than the polls are showing, and his gut was right. Mm-hmm. And they probably could have thrown some more money into a few other places and probably narrowed the gap. But I'd say that the positive things he did have not particularly helped him other than the stimulus at the end. And you can't, notwithstanding what everybody says, you really can't blame the whole corona crisis on him. You can blame some of the screw ups at the beginning on him, but you can also blame it on Obama and George W. Bush and other people who came before who didn't refill the reserves after the SARS and all the other things. And but those are not, it's not finger pointing, but he failed to lead the public in a direction that would have gotten the public to act in a way that was responsible. And that was very deliberate on his part. And if you listen to the taped interviews, that Woodward did with him, where he actually knows it's much more serious than he's saying all these things. He knew, but it's the way he is. And so the one thing he could have done better to get himself reelected is leading the public on masks and COVID. But I'll tell you what, from an accomplishment standpoint, this vaccine is happening. 2 vaccines, maybe 4 vaccines, and they're happening faster than the news for months has been pounding us. And they are being done in a safe way. And, oh, by the way, thank you, Swamp, because no matter what he did, couldn't accelerate it beyond what money would buy, although the processes have been truncated and accelerated, and that's fine. But no one's going to do anything unsafe at the FDA and CDC or any of these other places handling it. So his impatience to get it out was a good thing in a sense. The press's denial of that as logical was harmful to him. Now they're thanking Fauci and these guys for the vaccine, but
right. It was
Trump
him
hadn't said, I want the vaccine by so-and-so, it wouldn't have happened.
He wanted it by election
year,
day.
right?
Yeah. And that's all everybody was like, oh, now they're announcing the vaccines the week after the election. Yeah. Convenient timing. And I'm going, I didn't follow the vaccine news very closely, but pretty much every press conference Trump was talking about how it was going to be available by election day. I mean, it was a constant drumbeat. And so is it ready and out and available? Because I remember in April, like, it was going to take 4 years to do a vaccine, and it was going to be a long process, and now it's here in 9 months, and I'm like, ugh. Is that because they just poured so much federal dollars into these companies? And
so promised? They did a couple things. In some cases, they actually they poured money into the research itself and the processes in these companies. And in other cases where the companies would not accept the money, they gave them contracts. So like Pfizer wouldn't, quote, accept the money, but Pfizer got, $2.5 billion or something to produce, tens of millions of doses, and they're already produced. So what they've done is they've, rather than a linear process and, do this, then do that, then do this, then do that, wait till you finished each process. They broke it into a bunch of pieces. They felt high degrees of certainty about the science behind the new vaccines, and they began production of the vaccine months ago.
Before approval, basically.
Pfizer and all of these guys. And that was because the government gave the money or made a contract with them to pay for this up front. And in reality, they have done the same thing on the COVID testing. I went down and got my test today because I wanted to get it it's being filmed the Sunday before or done the Sunday before Thanksgiving. I've got some guests coming in and everybody's having to take a test. Totally free, drive in, totally free, easy process. Took a long time to ramp up, but all these things do take a long time to ramp up. I think basically the science around the vaccine is phenomenal.
So they basically produced it before the FDA approval.
They start producing it. They've tested it. They've done, they do a series of trials with smaller groups, and then they go into a full blown trial of 30,000 people or something. And, one of them had to adjust because they didn't have enough minorities in it, which is really important. And because sometimes, race and gender and all these things can have an effect on the efficacy of vaccines and other medicines, as we all know. But the manufacturing process started months ago, and it's being finished. And so, they've been cranking these things out, and they use new gene technologies. They've used traditional processes. Traditional processes take forever. But here's the kind of thing I was thinking about it this morning when I heard it. That is the bureaucracy versus everyone else in the urgency. So, Alcazar, the Secretary of HHS, Health and Human Services, was on yesterday saying, we're pushing all these millions of doses out, and it's going into FDA approval. And someone says, well, how long is that approval process? And Fauci as well. And it takes a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks, mid-December. Well, they're reviewing data. Okay. They've already looked at it several times. This is the kind of thing that if they weren't bureaucrats, they would say, why are we taking 3 weeks? They used to take 3 months or 3 years, who knows? But 3 weeks, they could throw people on this and get it done in 3 days.
My brain is kind of going, well, doesn't this belie the fact that we don't need these people at all?
You need them. You need them because you want somebody to take. You want a fall guy if it goes bad.
Okay,
well, that's what they're all afraid of.
Yeah.
But I will say the bureaucracy here did their job. They got yanked around and they got beaten up, which is the way it is. And if you've ever managed anything as big as this process, which most of us haven't, it just takes time, and you can't anticipate every twist and turn. So I'll tell you, of the things that he did right, ultimately, that the government did right under his watch, it's that they accelerated the vaccine and they finally got the testing out. And everybody can complain about it, and they will keep complaining about it until he's gone. And Biden will point the finger at him and blame him for it if it goes wrong,
right?
But I think that is an accomplishment in the end, and who knows whether he'll get any credit for that. And I do think the economy in general, over the first 3 years of the administration, would have gotten him reelected.
I do
had
too.
There been no COVID.
Yeah, I think his. If I were to answer my own earlier question, like I think January Trump is sailing to a victory.
Yep.
But
and we did talk about that.
Then you get to the failure of testing. You get his stunt at the church. You get the first debate. You get the threatening to undermine the elections. Like he just reinforced over 2020 all the things that people didn't like about him instead of talking about the things that he did right and that he did well. And he tried to sneak some of that in with the economy, or he tried to sneak in that he was non-interventionist in foreign policy, and then he'd immediately blow it by just proving the left right about who this guy is all along. And that's the thing about Trump, is it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it's just, if I were a Republican, I'd be so furious all the time, but because for every win, there was always another loss or two to kind of erase that stuff. It wasn't just about the words; it was just that he was so unfocused.
Remember, he also was leading them, and they wouldn't follow on a number of issues like the need for another stimulus bill.
Right. Trump
was saying 2.1, let's make it 2.6 trillion dollars,
right?
And it's because he's not a fiscal genius. I mean, but he was correct, And then now we got Steve Mnuchin out there shutting down some of the dollars that haven't been spent, and anybody with a jot of sense knows the economy is going to crater on December 31st unless they can deal with the continued unemployment at a lower level, lower cost, and additional dollars into the economy. And, interest rates are zero. They should just do it now.
So I keep seeing this, and let me ask you.
Exit later.
Yeah, I haven't followed this, but like the stock market looks like it's a little above where it was in February. What happens on December 31st? What is this funding that everybody is panicking on it's something run out at the end of the year?
Yes. So the Fed has the authority to extend very, very low interest loans and to people with higher risk profiles. They were talking about additional stimulus checks of $1,200 per person. They were trying to, right now unemployment is set at $600. They were going to drop to $300 because there was a lot of evidence that for many people it was better to be unemployed and get your $600 a week check than go work.
Yeah.
So there was a fix there. There was aid that a number of these counties and cities and states are virtually bankrupt because they've picked up a lot of the expense of COVID that's not been picked up by the feds, although, of course, they've also gotten a lot of extra money. I mean, here down in Virginia, we've gotten an extra $2 billion, and that's been distributed down to the counties. And, here I am in this little county of 8,000 people, and we got almost $2 million. So a lot of that we're going to try to push into broadband, which they really need. By the way, and I do think broadband is one of the, if there's a good thing coming out of COVID, it's the new vaccine processes, and it's more broadband, and people finally breaking some of the habits around education and business and all of these kinds of things. And that's probably another whole story. But so Mnuchin's basically he was trying to get the stimulus bill that cratered because of McConnell, basically, and then, but he's now trying to cut back the money. And the adult in the room in the last several major economic crises the last 20 years have been the Fed. The Federal Reserve Chairman had done what the political leadership wouldn't do, and Powell propped up everybody, banks, loans, businesses, everybody. And so Mnuchin's cutting that off. And I think it's a pretty stupid thing. This is a victory for the swamp. in the sense of the traditional Republican, the budget guys who supposedly don't believe in debt unless it's their debt,
Right.
their stuff. So if Mnuchin doesn't turn it around, it will be the victory for that side of the Republican Party.
I love Ted Cruz kind of acknowledging, yeah, we'll probably go back to that whole debt thing now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it reminds me a little bit of, we've been watching the new The Crown season 4, and Margaret Thatcher is the prime minister. And there's one of the episodes is around the Commonwealth when all of the 48 of the 49 presidents or whatever, however many there was, voted to impose sanctions on South Africa and all of that. And Margaret Thatcher was the only member of the Commonwealth who wouldn't sign the agreement. And of course, the Queen can't sign it. But she was, in this telling of it, very embarrassed and angry because she felt that Margaret had no heart. And Margaret Thatcher, in this telling, which is pretty consistent with what we know from the biographies and autobiography and everything else, she was a daughter of a grocer. He taught her personal self-reliance. Don't worry about the rest of the crowd. Everybody has to pull themselves by their own bootstraps. And Britain, under the first 3 or 4 years of her rule, was pretty bad. The unemployment skyrocketed and interest rates went up. And her whole reason to increase unemployment was to get control of interest rates so she could bring them back down and use that as stimulus. But in the meantime, an awful lot of people suffered. So that's the kind of thing that resonates with a lot of my Republican friends.
Right.
And I'm saying that as a Republican, that
Let them eat cake.
Yeah. No, debt's bad. Well, and if we didn't have debt, we wouldn't be nearly as great a country as we are, because you use debt to finance the future.
Right. So before we move on to Biden and what he's going to do, I have to ask you about Trump's last 18, 19 days and Rudy Giuliani and his leaking hair and their lawsuits and the undermining of the peaceful transfer of power. I mean, I don't think anybody expected Trump to take this gracefully. But what has been your impression of the voter fraud and it's all rigged and it's been stolen from me act?
There are a few things that turn your head a little bit. We have the 2 Georgia counties where the votes were put on in one case, the votes, if I understand it, were put on a device and just they forgot to reinsert it and count the 2,600 votes. And those were modestly more for Trump. And that narrowed the gap. And then there was another one where they double counted, if I understand it, when they stuck the device into the computer to count it. So, but that only made about an 800 vote difference, as I understand it. And now it's all been hand recounted. So that's the equivalent of an audit. And they had almost nothing after that, other than those 2 things. As historically, you get very little out of recounts, although sometimes you do. And Michigan, I think anybody with a jot of sense has to be horrified by the jawboning of these electors. And the way that works is at the county level, you have two Republicans and 2 Democrats, and in this case, it was 2 Black Democrats and 2 white Republicans, and they have to certify what comes out of the precincts, and they do it evenly so that one side can't steamroller the other. But in this case, obviously, early in the process, someone got to the 2 Republicans and they wouldn't certify. And then they had a steady stream of people coming into the meeting protesting and poll workers and on both sides. And so they ended up doing it. And then, she gets a call from Trump and then she says, well, I would like to take my vote back. Well, it's too late. And so on. So and it's been certified now. So, and then of course he just makes himself look bad, and you have to, and frankly, he doesn't care because, what the polling data shows is that 70% of Republicans believe that there has been fraud or some other kind of shenanigan in the vote.
Yeah.
And that he would so undermine the process is really amazing. And people, and part of this is because people just don't understand how vote is counted. And every state has its own rules. That's the way it is in the Constitution. Each state runs their own electors. There's no federal process. And that's deliberate. That is because we are a union of states. And so he really is trying to throw some Hail Marys, but he doesn't have a very smart quarterback on this one, I'm afraid.
Yeah, he's using people's ignorance against themselves, and it really frustrates me. And to stick up for my Republican friends, I'm starting to see the more, I mean, I'm not going to say establishment types, because like friends like my friend Mike or Mark or some of these, they don't believe the election was overturned and stolen, and they don't believe in some of the Dominion stuff. They do think, all right, maybe there's some fishy stuff, kind of like you mentioned. But like that 70% number when it first came out, I was like, oh, wow. But I think we're at a point now after a week and a half where Discovery hasn't turned anything up, and he's lost 30 lawsuits and only won one. And like, I think it finally got to a point where everybody goes, all right, there's nothing here, and this guy's just being selfish and un-American,
I don't think
frankly.
It's going to change anybody's mind.
No.
So, I think 70% of the Republicans are going to still believe it. Of the so-called Republicans these days. And of course, Republicans are now only about 35% of the electorate.
Yeah.
And Democrats are about 38, and the rest are supposed independents. So, I was on this, I've told you, I go to this group I called the Committee of the Concerned, which is put on by the Niskanen Center. And it's a lot of really smart people in politics, a lot of hand wringing, and a lot of the never Trumpers, and you hear some interesting stuff, and and I wouldn't reveal any of the detail of it, but a lot of them worked against Trump and Republicans, and they were, some of them were working with Trump before this, before in the first election. And there was a lot of rejoicing there, but also hand-wringing about, okay, now what's going to happen to the Republican Party now? Who's going to lead it? And I don't think there's a Republican Party left. It's a bunch of real Republicans who are conservatives. I sort of threw out that, why don't we have a third party? And I was laughed out of the room virtually by some of these people.
Yeah, because you're the crazy one.
Yeah, right.
Do you think
no one would do a third party?
What a crazy concept!
I want to start one called Real Republicans.
Yeah, like okay,
and we're Burkean conservatives.
I have been having a ball the last month with these Tea Party Republicans and the establishment Republicans who just change it from the inside. It's all conspiracy theorists, 9/11 truthers in the Libertarian Party, and I'm like, ha ha. But do you think that he gets drug out of the White House? Does he vacate the property? Does he show up to the inauguration? Like, what do you think that flashpoint looks like?
I think he'll go to New York with a family about a week before.
Right.
And Melania will move everything out.
Yeah.
And then 50-50 as to whether he shows up. Of course, it's 50-50 as to what kind of inauguration it's going to be. We're still going to be in the middle of this. And I have just been trying like crazy to figure out what it's going to look like. Typically, and we haven't talked about how the transition works. So when I was in the transition, but many years ago, but typically in the inauguration, you have the swearing in. There are hundreds of thousands of people in front of you. There's a luncheon for the new president inside with members of Congress and special guests, and then they go home and change clothes and take a nap and party all night. And these parties are awful. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people coming to celebrate. And I have been through, at least 5 or 6 inaugurations, starting with Richard Nixon in 1968 when I was a freshman. I got an invitation because I'd been youth for Nixon. I was a freshman at Rice and traveled across country with 2 friends, and we had a great time because we were 18 or 19. We were going to the ball. We all got dressed up, and I think I went down to Richmond and got my grandmother for one of them. Took her with me, but we had a great time. And then you get to the real ones years later, and now these balls are 20, 30,000 people in a room, and you can't move, you can't dance, you can barely drink because everything costs you money, and the president always comes in and dances on the stage with his wife and the cabinet, and then they swirl away and go to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. And then the next morning, there are lots of different parties. There are sort of after parties and sidecar parties. And, for years, a guy named Joe Albritton, who was the head of Riggs Bank, used to have a private event at his home on Foxhall Avenue in Washington, which is a very Tony neighborhood. And I admit I used to live right up the street, and for a variety of reasons, including the fact that my wife was with the National Geographic and served on the Riggs board, we would always get invited. And I guess that was also, there was a group called it's the Alfalfa Club, which is a very limited membership. I don't know, it's 30 or 50 members, but that's another whole story about Washington. But and the president would come, and the last two presidents would come, and everybody was, and that was lovely. That was really a lot of fun, and maybe 100 people, and to be included was a big deal.
You have to wonder, like, Biden is a guy who's dreamed about being president his whole life, obviously.
Since he was 32.
And basically has run 4 times, and I don't know that he's humble, but I guess compared to Donald Trump, he seems like Pope Francis. And there may be part of him that is, probably bummed that he doesn't get the big inauguration with the, on the steps of the Capitol and that big photo and all that, because he's probably not going to get a second term or run for a second term. But there's also part of him that probably doesn't care as much as maybe a younger, ambitious politician might. So I am curious to see what that inauguration is going to look like, because I'm sure there's part of him that wants that big photo because he's been chasing that his whole time. But then there's also part of me that thinks Joe Biden's the kind of guy that will let Trump save face for the good of the country, for the good of even Trump.
If Trump would allow himself to do it. I don't know that Trump's going to do it. Right. And of course this the whole transition isn't it's just terrible. But Biden has handled it well. Trump, the way it works is the president, typically the authority to grant the president-elect new offices, and there's about 6.5 million, I think, for staff for the 60-some days you have between the election and the swearing in. And you know what? If he doesn't get it from transition, he's going to get it from private donors, which is what he's doing right now. Mm-hmm. And maybe they'll be paid back and maybe they won't. But, this transition director does have to follow some signals. And, I know that she consulted the transition, the head of the GSA, when George W. Bush and Al Gore were locked in. They did not begin the transition for, I can't remember whether it was 17 days or 35 days.
It was 36 days.
36 days. Yep. So it took some time. But, these guys are planning. And separate to all this, there is there's a presidential commission with staff that's funded to think through all these issues and not to tell people what to do, but to give them lists of jobs that can be filled and kind of an order and resources and all of that. And that's been going on for a long time. So Biden has had that dump, just like Trump got that dump. And I thought it was interesting the other day, Biden correctly said, I don't need the briefings. There are people who were in the administration 2 weeks ago, like Mark Esper, who can give him a briefing. And it's just, there's a symbolism of it more than the reality of it.
Yeah, and he seems to be hiring a lot of Obama people too. Like it's not like
well, they've only been out of the job 3.5 years, and believe me, not much changes in Washington in 3.5 years.
It's basically all been in carbonite because Trump has never ended his campaign. I mean, so one of the things that I'm concerned about and we can talk about foreign policy next, and this tees that up, is that in the 9/11 Commission report, one of the citations for why 9/11 happened was that 36-day gap in the transition, and they missed key intel during that period that led to something. I forget what the specific thing was, but it was a key piece of why 9/11 happened was the failed transition. And you've got people coming in now that are going to be 2, 3, 4 months behind. And, if there's something that happens, God forbid, Joe Biden is not necessarily, when it comes to making decisions on foreign policy and his track record of votes, not really has made the best of decisions. So I'm hoping that and it's also fascinating.
I've never been fond of his foreign policy. So
yeah.
But we've talked about this before. I do think he's had a table set up for him with a lot of interesting ingredients that will allow him a lot of interesting flexibility. So on China, everybody supports bashing China. Now he's got all of these tariffs. Is he going to relax some? I don't know, but the fact that they're there means he can only make it better for the Chinese, and for that he should get something.
There's great bargaining chips now. Yeah,
absolutely. So there is going to be that situation. It's true on just about everything. He can go back to the climate talks if he wants, and everybody will say, "Thank God you're here." But he ought to get something for that too. The reality is the climate talks and the outcomes were all imbalanced. You have these countries like China and India and others who are just spewing it out, and they need to get control of it. They put out a lot more than we do, and so Trump had a little reason there, but there are lots of things you can do to get other people's cooperation, which that's really what we've been talking about this whole time. He prefers to operate alone.
Yeah, I mean, we're
first.
There'd be great negotiations with the Iran deal, with TPP, with the Paris Accords,
totally.
all that stuff. But the people that cut all those deals are the people that are probably going to be Secretary of State and the UN ambassador. So it's not necessarily that. I mean, they thought they were good deals to begin with. So who knows? You could be right, but they also could.
Well, the Trans-Pacific Agreement is going to be interesting because the Chinese have just pulled together a major equivalent to that that includes Japan and Australia, which were our two major trading partners for that part of the world, and Vietnam and all the others. So I think that one's going to be more difficult. That won't rectify itself soon, but I think some of the other things will.
Yeah.
And then of course, back to the Mnuchin thing. Basically, a lot of people think he's deliberately trying to tie Biden's hands with this, give him less flexibility. And of course, they made the point that George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush before him and others have done all they can to give presidents some flexibility. I mean, W. didn't finish the auto bailout basically because he wanted Obama to be able to decide if that was what he wanted to do. So, that is and this is where Biden will not lose from not having a transition yet is, when you do a transition, you send a team of people in, they interview all of the major people, they put together briefing books of what's going on and what the major expenditures are and all that. And, that's stuff that people who haven't been in the agency can tell you about. So he'll be okay on that. What he won't be so okay on is things like secret deals. So, we know there are purported to be secret codicils to this Afghan deal. And of course, Trump is pulling the rug out from under any leeway we have to negotiate there in order to fulfill his promise, which everybody agrees with. Most people would like to be out of Afghanistan and everywhere else, but responsible people know you can't exactly, cut and run. You've got to actually, you want a negotiated outcome of some sort. And so he's not going to know that because that whatever that is not commonly known. And it's the kind of thing that Mike Pompeo would know. And of course, I'm sure Pompeo will tell these guys. And I have to believe that this woman who I think is, the GSA administrator is kind of between a rock and a hard place. I suspect once Pennsylvania certifies and the Florida certified, Georgia certified, I don't know, the Arizona is certified yet. But once that handful of 7 states have certified, she'll say he is presumptive president-elect. And I'm guessing that's in the next, 10 to 12 days.
I would bet they wait until December 18th or when the Electoral College, when the electors are decided. I mean, I bet they drag this out as long as possible.
They might well, but I think she will I think she's likely. There's a high probability. I think she'll do it once these handful of states have certified that their electors have been selected by virtue of the vote.
Do you think any of these spineless Republicans will actually start putting pressure on her to do it?
Any of these what?
Spineless Republican weakling.
No. Well, they're
cowardly.
sort of sneaking out there bit by bit. The interesting thing coming, of course, is the Georgia race. Two Senate races, and normally Republicans win runoffs in Georgia. They have historically, but the Democrats have done massive registration campaigns, and I suspect they're running the money right now to do that. And if the Democrats lost those two seats, the Republicans lost two seats, there'd be a tied Senate, which would be brokered by the new vice president, and that would be Kamala Harris, or Kamala Harris, as Purdue called her down there.
There's a few more K's added to it. It's Kamala Harris. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And then we see that the one of the two now has COVID and is going to be stuck in for another 10 days, which kind of hurts her campaigning. So it's going to be interesting. And that happens January 6th, I think, right?
As a Republican, you must just like sit back and go, all right, when did we become the Three Stooges?
I do. I think that's a great analogy. It's an insanity. But I can't say that I'm happy with any of the leadership of the last 8 or 10 years in the party. I think McConnell, for some people, he's done a fabulous job. The judges thing, of course, is very meaningful to people on the the anti-abortion crowd and some others, gun control, the gun crowd and all that. And, they are a part of the Republican heritage, but the modern heritage, but they are not all Republicans. And I think good conservative Republicans would like to see good, stable government and institutions at work. And they'd like to see us work with our friends and treat people reasonably fairly. That's conservative.
But the problem
I don't see it.
I know, but the problem is your primary voters, your base. I mean, they are the problem. If you think about Senate majorities, you think about Christine O'Donnell, Todd Akin, you think about Richard Mourdock here in Indiana, you think about Sarah Palin. You think about all the different choices that have been made. There would have been massive majorities for Republicans. And if Donald Trump, the undervote for Trump, he had 354,000 less votes in the Senate races where there were Senate or gubernatorial candidates.
Right. That's right. And those are Republicans who split their ticket and left.
The gut of the base voter in the GOP is totally wrong and leading that party in the wrong direction. And there's nobody that can really seem to, I'm sure Ben Sass. Somehow Ben Sass is a controversial figure to the left and the right. That's the stuff that just blows my mind.
I like Ben Sass, and I know him slightly. I briefed him and the Council on Foreign Relations and stuff, and with several other people. But I do think he is too timid on important things. There are things he will take a stand on, but at least he gets out there, and I will give him that. But I think he doesn't project an image of strength about doing it. Romney, I think, is taking the position of an elder statesman. I wouldn't be surprised to see Romney run again, frankly, 2024. So
I was thinking that today too. Yeah, he seems to be vocal in the right spots. But again,
I just don't know that he could deal with the Trumpsters. And of course, the speculation is that if Trump doesn't run, Don Jr. is going to run, or Ivanka.
I thought the analysis from the niece who said that Donald Trump will never put himself in a position to lose again. And so he will not run.
Well, that could be true. Yeah. I think that's probably right.
So,
and I also think he's going to be in a position where he has to rebuild his business. And of course, he's got Cy Vance Jr. in New York chasing his tax returns, and he's got potential federal suits. Now, if I were giving Joe Biden advice, I would say, shut off all the federal laws, the suits, stop talking about him, let him try to figure out his business, instruct Cy Vance to leave him alone, and you go do your administration. Now, Trump I think he's going to spend the first 2 years trying to rebuild the business, and I think he's probably going to go try to buy a TV network and become a media figure with Steve Bannon. But I think, and then you have to worry about that. But
why buy a TV network when you can just license your name to it? Which is, would it
Trump
be
network?
Would it be obstruction of justice for Biden to get involved in the Trump lawsuits and all that stuff?
No.
I mean, okay.
No, I think the president can always has new priorities. Every new president has new priorities,
right?
And whether it's a direct order or whatever, there are plenty of ways to just get past that stuff, or to offer a deal, and of course, what I'm sure you've read that supposedly the deal that will happen is Biden is going to offer Trump a deal to shut all these suits off for his going quietly into the night, and that Trump wants that, and I just can't see it.
It cost Ford a lot to let Nixon go. It cost him his. I mean, he's the only president that's president without being elected, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's really that pardoning. I mean, you know this better than I, but in a lot of ways, it seems like that would be the better option for the country to move on, is just to let this guy go. Like, let's move on. And Biden is that type. If it were Harris or Cory Booker or somebody who are younger, they may want to use that as him as a scapegoat. But I could see Biden going, for the good of the country, I'm just going to let this go and let's move on.
But I will say, Biden is a long politician. When he does that, he's making a calculus,
right?
And he may calculate that it's good for the country, but first and foremost, he's going to try to figure out what's good for Joe Biden.
And that's what Ford did too. He's like, I don't want us talking about Nixon. I want to be in the headlines, not him.
Right. And that's, as we know, I was in the Presidential Clemency Board. It was what he tried to do to mitigate some of that for the Vietnam vets. Anyway,
I want to ask.
It's going to be interesting.
You voted for that CIA. I've never forgiven you for voting for that CIA kid in the last election.
Evan McMullin.
Yes. Who did you vote for this time, if you'd like to say?
I voted for your favorite libertarian,
Joe Jorgensen. All right.
Jorgensen, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of my friends did.
Really?
Yeah, totally. My Never Trump friends did. A lot of mine did. Most probably voted for Biden. But, I made the calculation. I'm here in Virginia. It's going to go for Biden. My vote isn't going to sway it one way or the other. If I thought my vote would really sway it, I might have held my nose and voted for the first Democrat ever to get rid of Trump. But I didn't have to.
Good. Well, that's
I whipped out.
Good to hear.
But your candidate didn't do so well.
Nah, we have an upcoming episode on all the reasons why.
And nor did the Greens candidate. And the Greens were 3.5% last time, if I remember.
It's hard. It's, people are not willing to, quote unquote, throw their vote away in an existential threat election like we just had, where the media is so hell-bent on getting rid of this guy that they're never going to give Jorgensen any time. They're never going to have Hawkins on.
Oh, I never saw Jorgensen on the tube.
Yeah,
ever.
No. I mean,
I watch every night, hours, and in the morning, hours.
She did not have the gravitas of even Gary Johnson, so that
Gary
didn't help.
Johnson had been in the government.
Yeah, but the media was not taking any chances on getting Trump out of office, in my opinion.
And remember, in the last election in 2016, no one believed Trump could win.
Right, exactly.
So that's why you could vote for the Libertarian or the Green or the whatever.
It's safe.
McMullin, whatever.
All right, final wrap up. I know that you probably have not been traveling too much, but we always end with dining in D.C. or events that if you're ever allowed to travel to the nation's capital, maybe you get the vaccine and your microchip clears and you're allowed into the city. Where should people eat?
I don't know when I'm going to get back to D.C. next, but I did have a really lovely recent. I'm kind of on the East Coast, about an hour and a half from Newport News, Hampton Roads, that area where the fleet, the aircraft carrier sits, and lots of defense industry down there. And Virginia Beach has 2 or 3 really good restaurants. And we have some longtime friends down there from Washington, and they invited us to a restaurant called Terrapin, which once a year does a truffle dinner. and they fly their truffles in from France. And even in COVID, we got truffles flown in from France. So we had ceviche with truffle and fish. You know how that is, fish and a sauce like lime or something. Then we had duck with truffle, which was fabulous. And can't remember what the vegetable was, but the dessert was a truffle ice cream between two chocolate cookies. And let me just tell you, you may think that mushroom ice cream sounds awful,
right?
But truffle ice cream, it was fabulous. So yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, that was.
What
and
was
they
this
do it
place
once
called?
a year. If you see it, you should go to it.
What was it called again?
Well, it's the restaurant is Terrapin.
Okay.
And it's kind of a long-standing, older French restaurant there. And it was all outdoors. You know, they had a big tent, and we go in, and everybody, you know, socially distanced, and the HEPA filters are filtering the air, and the fans are going. And actually, the funny thing is that it's a small group of people, and only that one night. And I was talking with another good friend of mine, and someone he had known was there at the dinner, probably 6 feet away from me on that same night. So, you know, small world.
Yeah. All right. Well, Rob, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. It's great to catch up, and you know, who knows what we'll talk about next time? Maybe the second term of Donald Trump after it's all been overturned, after Rudy Giuliani manages to succeed. Still can't.
What a bunch of bozos.
I mean, the hair dye, the Four Seasons, it's just hilarious.
I would say to people, though, my closing remark to you and everyone else is, look, you know, Biden is a seasoned hand. The people around him are seasoned. Most of the people under Trump in the agencies who are responsible are reasonably seasoned. And if they're not in the public eye, the reality is I think they're probably already reaching out to the Biden team and doing what they should be doing, even if they don't want the boss to know.
That's an interesting thought that I hadn't considered, that the swamp monster has a phone too.
Oh, the swamp has a phone.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for listening to Weird Libertarians, Rob.
Great to see you. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving to you as well, and to our listeners, we thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again next week.